The past few months had been a whirlwind of deadlines, negotiations, and relentless travel. As a senior manager for an international trading firm, my calendar was a battlefield, with little room for anything outside work. The relentless pace wasn't new to me. I'd spent years climbing the corporate ladder, juggling family, and battling jet lag. Yet, no matter how accustomed I was to the chaos, this stretch had tested my limits. It wasn't just the job that wore me down. A subtle shift had crept into my personal life, one I couldn't quite put my finger on. My wife Jean's calls had grown less frequent, her messages shorter. Even the kids sounded distant when I managed to connect with them during late-night time zones. It felt as though the fabric of my life was unraveling, thread by thread. But I kept telling myself that it was just the distance talking. After enduring a grueling 20-hour flight from Singapore to Chicago, including a tedious layover in Taipei, I arrived at O'Hare drained and disheveled. Though seated in business class, the experience was a far cry from luxury, and even celebrating my birthday mid-air felt hollow. Yet the real weight on my shoulders wasn't the journey. It was the meeting awaiting me back in Chicago, where the head of our international trading desk was poised to deliver a reckoning. We landed around 8:30 a.m., and I caught a shuttle to the Chicago Sheraton. I'd booked the room the night before, so it was ready when I arrived. After dropping my bags, I showered and went to the gym. I worked out for an hour, half weights, half treadmill, then took a long shower, finishing with cold water until I was practically frozen. After warming up, I was as alert as I could get. I headed to the hotel restaurant for the breakfast I'd missed: pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, sausage, and 4 cups of coffee. By 10:30 a.m., I was at J.P. Morgan on Dearborn for my meeting. They took me to a small conference room, and I was left alone for 17 minutes, standing by the window, silent. I counted to 1,020 Mississippi during the wait. From my time in Asia, I'd learned not to show weakness. When Joe Rutledge, VP of International Stocks, and corporate lawyer Samuel Young entered, I knew someone was getting fired, and it wasn't going to be either of them. Joe wasted no time. "What the hell happened in Singapore?" he demanded, slamming the table. "We sent you to stabilize things, and you approved buying $300 million in stock for a company with zero data." "Yes," I replied flatly. Joe's face turned purple. "Care to explain?" I calmly listed the facts. The CEO was top tier, the management had decades of experience, and the aquaculture project had real backing, including reports from Deloitte and KPMG. "Then why's their stock dropping?" Joe shot back. "They went public at $17, and now they're at $9.55. "You're missing the bigger picture," I told him. "We own 25% of the company. We're the largest shareholder, and the drop's due to short sellers, mostly Chinese, with some Thai and Vietnamese players, trying to tank the company or acquire it cheaply." Joe wasn't convinced. "It's just a failure." I stood my ground. "We need to stick to our plan." In the end, he didn't listen. "The council's made its decision. You're out." Samuel then offered me a severance package: 3 months' salary, vacation days, stock options, and nearly $800,000. But my reputation was shattered, and future job prospects were non-existent. By 2 o'clock, I had signed the paperwork, rolled my 401k into an IRA, returned all company property, and was escorted out. I stood on the sidewalk, feeling strange, as though something were terribly wrong. I quickly grabbed a cab back to the hotel, my mind racing with the thought that I might collapse on the street alone. In my room, I grabbed a mini bottle of whiskey, mixed it with 7-Up, and poured it over ice. Blasphemy, I know. I sat down to think. At 42, I wasn't ready to retire, but was I too old to start over? The only option seemed like a gamble. If I didn't have the courage to move forward, how could I expect others to? So I went shopping. An hour later, I had a new laptop with Windows 11 and the software I needed to track investments. I plugged in a flash drive with all my Singapore transactions, thoughtfully left behind in my hotel room to avoid trouble, and got to work. I checked our savings, $50,000. My investment accounts had $250,000 each, but they required 24-hour notice. I sold some blue-chip stocks and calculated that with my salary and stock options, I'd have over $1.2 million by the end of the week. I transferred most of it into an offshore account, Blue Sky International. By 9 o'clock, I ordered a hamburger and beer and pulled out my phone. It had been off for 36 hours. I debated turning it on, but was too mentally exhausted. Instead, I lay in bed watching the news, barely absorbing anything. Eventually, jet lag hit, and I passed out. The next morning, after a quick breakfast, I turned my phone on. It was flooded with messages. "Help, Dad. Mom is having a breakdown," from Dean and Katie. "What's going on with Jean?" from my dad. "Happy birthday, why aren't you answering your phone?" from Jean's parents. "Happy birthday, Dad," from Dean and Kathy. "Happy birthday, Adam," from Team Singapore. "Happy birthday, son," from my dad. "Happy birthday, little brother," from my sister Georgia. There were calls from Dean saying Mom had been crying but had calmed down. No calls from Jean, no birthday greetings, and no explanation for her strange behavior. It felt like I didn't exist. I caught the 8:30 flight to Springfield and called home to find the house in chaos. The kids had left their games and trash everywhere. The kitchen was a mess, and the laundry room was full of dirty clothes. It took hours to clean up. Later, I checked the aquaculture stock, down to $9.37. But I wasn't worried. When it hit $25, we'd be in a great position. I checked our bank account again. Everything seemed normal, but my mind was racing. I went to the garage, reconnected the Audi's battery, and it started right up. I went to the store, bought groceries for Thai green curry, and made a small victory out of the chaos. Jean's car pulled into the driveway as I finished cooking. The kids rushed inside, shouting that Dad was home. I hugged them tightly, kissed them repeatedly, and felt tears well up. Katie clung to me, sobbing. Dean was quieter, but just as glad to see me. We stayed like that for a long time, the world outside seeming to disappear. When I looked up, Jean was standing in the doorway watching us. Her expression was distant, almost sad, and a couple of tears rolled down her cheek. She waited until I stood, holding the kids, then pulled me into a brief, gentle kiss. "Welcome home, Adam," she said, her tone flat, her body language tense. Her eyes didn't linger on me for long. That smells good," she sniffed. "What is it?" "Thai green curry," I replied, beaming. Dean and Katie exchanged confused glances. "I don't know what it is, Dad, but it smells really good," Dean said. He smiled and hugged me while Kathy wrapped her arms around my neck, legs off the ground. "You two go clean up and get ready for dinner," Jean ordered. "You'll have plenty of time with your dad later." Jean gave me a quick hug and a kiss on the cheek. "You look exhausted, Adam," she observed, assessing me. "How come you're back so soon? I thought you were supposed to be away another 8 weeks. "Turns out the bosses didn't like some of my ideas," I admitted. "I just got fired." She flushed, struggling for words. "Well, we'll figure something out." "But what about you?" I asked, staring at the almost unfamiliar woman in front of me. After 15 years of marriage, she felt more like a stranger. "Are you?" Her eyes clouded. Then she quickly recovered. "It's work," she said, trying to smile. "The market's down. There's a lot of pressure on everyone." She gestured to show the gravity of the situation. At that moment, the kids returned from cleaning up and rushed over to me. "We'll talk later," Jean said, heading toward the kitchen. We sat down for dinner, the first family meal in 4 months. I served the food and poured Jean and me some cool white wine. Dean wanted Mountain Dew, and Kathy asked for water. We ate together, and I shared stories about Singapore, dragon boat races, ninja tag, and other team-building activities. After dinner, Dean and Kathy disappeared for a moment and returned with a wrapped present. "Happy birthday, Dad!" they exclaimed. Jean's hands flew to her mouth in surprise. I opened the gift, a Brothers in Arms CD set. I'd always wanted it, and I kissed the kids in thanks, their smiles wide with joy. Jean, looking embarrassed, said, "I'm so sorry, Adam, I totally forgot." I could have reminded her of the gold diamond earrings I'd given her for her birthday, but instead I focused on the kids. "You don't have to get me anything," I said, smiling. "Being home with my family is enough." Dean and Katie jumped into my arms, calling out, "Love you, Daddy." We chatted for a while, but soon they needed to do their homework, and Jean and I started cleaning up the kitchen. "What's going on with you, Jean?" I asked. "You're not the person I know." She stopped, then slumped, clearly weary. I don't know, Adam. I guess I'm depressed. You've always traveled a lot, but this last time was too long. It feels like we don't even live the same life anymore." She started crying. "I feel lost." I pulled her into a hug. She resisted for a moment, then let me hold her as she sobbed softly. We stayed like that for a while, but I knew we couldn't solve everything in one night. We agreed that we both needed to make sacrifices for a future where I could retire by 50 and we could enjoy life together. Afterward, Jean suggested I spend time with the kids. I helped Katie with her homework, then did the same for Dean. When I kissed Katie goodnight, I walked over to Dean's room. "Mom's not okay, Dad. he said quietly. She's crying and not doing much around the house. She even forgot your birthday. He looked around to make sure we weren't being overheard. I think she's having a nervous breakdown. Please fix it, Dad. I nodded, though I had no idea how to help. Later, I heard Jean talking on the phone. She hung up quickly when she saw me. Who was that? I asked, raising an eyebrow. One of the girls from the office, she replied, cutting off the conversation. We exchanged a long look. She wasn't going to talk, and I could sense her anger, though she wasn't showing it. Whatever was troubling her, it was serious, but I could already feel the jet lag hitting again, and I still had a lot to figure out. It was 9:30 when I checked the Singapore Stock Exchange. They had been trading for 2 hours, and CA was at $9.90, slightly up from the previous day. I went upstairs to wait for Jean. She finished in the bathroom, came out wearing an oversized t-shirt, and walked into the bedroom. I cleaned up and climbed into bed, reaching for her. She tensed for a moment before cuddling against me. Please just hold me, she whispered in a soft voice. I held her for a long time. Something was off. She wasn't the woman I knew. Had I been away too long? Was the separation too hard? But she never mentioned anything. No affairs, no change of heart. Then a thought hit me. What if she's sick? What if it's something serious, and she doesn't know how to tell me? I couldn't stop the worry, but eventually exhaustion and jet lag took over and I fell into a deep sleep. In my dreams, I chased an elusive shadow I couldn't catch. I woke at 4:30, still feeling drained. I decided to go for a run and promised myself I'd buy melatonin to help adjust my sleep schedule. After an hour, I returned to find Jean had left a note asking me to feed the kids breakfast and take them to school. It was still early, so I checked my bank account. The transfer from JP Morgan had cleared, so I moved the money into my offshore account. I checked CA stock, and it had dropped to $8.99. No longer rising, but heading down. I had to decide, fix my marriage or secure my financial future. Could I do both? I spent time with Dean and Kathy, asking about their past few months. They mostly did corporate activities with Jean's boss, Anthony Miller, mini golf, movies, dinners out. Dean must have noticed my face. Dad, he said, she always said Mom was such a big part of the company, like we were all one big happy family. Katie nodded. Aunt Evelyn was always with us. I smiled, glad they stayed active, but now that I was back, I wanted to take a vacation together. They agreed, and I hugged them again before driving them to school. I made a few calls, including one to my old mentor, George Tallis. We talked about my career and the potential for investment opportunities. Later, I went to HHS Pharmacy across from St. John's Hospital. While leaving with some melatonin, I saw Jean and Evelyn Miller walking out of the hospital. They were holding on to each other, looking grief-stricken, and got into an Uber together. I watched them as they left, feeling confused. Was Jean sick or Evelyn? They didn't seem ill, but they looked deeply connected, more than just friends. A lover, perhaps? My mind raced. What was going on? I shook it off and went to my next meeting, staying focused on the business at hand. In the first meeting, Julian Knowles said he'd discuss the proposal with his group. The second, with Aaron Goldstein, went better. He liked the idea and transferred $10 million into my trading account. After the paperwork, I stopped for coffee at Starbucks when George called. He liked the plan and had interested investors. We agreed on a commission structure tied to the yield. I called my dad to discuss the COA opportunity. He said he'd invest $100K and wire the funds the next day. I then explained my situation to Jean, who went quiet, his methodical thinking kicking in. After a long pause, my dad said, "Her behavior looks like someone in mourning." "She's not mourning anyone," I replied. "Her parents are fine, living in Arizona." My dad paused, adding, "She has no siblings and her cousins are distant." We talked longer, and I had to agree with his assessment. He suggested I hire a private investigator, giving me the contact of someone they'd used in the past. At home, I called my contacts in Singapore and Southeast Asia to check the mood there. I recreated CA's risk profile, and it matched my initial report. Solid management, rational numbers, and the key factor, everyone in the management team had invested their own money. That made my position stronger. Everything was ready for trading when SSE opened. While waiting, I called the private investigator, Clarence Williams. His southern drawl felt deliberate, but his mind was sharp. He asked for a $5,000 advance, promising to start the next day, thanks to my dad's referrals. I sipped coffee, trying to calm my nerves. Dean and Kathy came home late from practice, and I spent time with them, but mentioned I had work to do. Jean arrived looking tired, but more focused than the night before. "I got Chinese," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Are you working?" she asked. "Hi, Jean," I replied, keeping things distant. No affection came from her either, just like when I was a kid. "I'll be working from 7. "Okay," she said, uncertain. "I have a present for your birthday." She handed me a small gift, a card that said, "Happy birthday, Adam, love, Jean." Inside was a bottle of Hugo Boss aftershave. I thanked her, and she kissed me on the cheek, which felt impersonal. At dinner, Dean and Kathy talked about their day, while Jean remained quiet. We discussed changes during my absence. Dean mentioned the old skate park being closed, and Kathy said it was good that Mr. Miller had turned a house into a shelter for misused teens. I raised an eyebrow. "You mentioned that?" I asked. "Tony wants a conservation project, and this is his way of doing it," she said, offering vague details. She seemed to be holding back. I didn't know Miller was into that kind of thing. "His wife started it before she died, and he's continued it," Jean added, almost smugly. "Why now?" I asked, pushing her for more. She paused, her expression hardening. "Now the opportunity is there." I nodded, pretending to agree. "Sounds like a great cause." She smiled back, and we got up to clean. I could tell she wasn't telling me everything. Her body language suggested she knew more, and it seemed connected to the personal issue I had helped clean up. After I took out the trash, I told her I was going back to work in my office. It was an hour before trading opened in Singapore. As I sat at my desk, I reflected on my marriage, trying to manage the growing pain inside me. I knew if I let it consume me, I wouldn't be able to focus on what needed to be done. But I also realized that holding it back could make things worse. Jean and I had always been compatible, agreeing on everything from where to live to how many kids to have. The past few years had been tough with my travel, but we'd always reconnected when I returned. This time, however, something felt different. I thought we were on the same page, but it turned out we weren't, and that made me angry. In Singapore and South Asia, many women sought out foreign men, some for status or money. I was approached daily in the office, on the subway, at markets, and in bars. Many of my coworkers dated locals, some even treated them like servants. I personally found it distasteful, but I kept turning down these advances because I was married to a woman I loved. But now I wondered if she still loved me, considering her behavior. I couldn't pinpoint any warning signs except for recent communication breakdowns. But for now, I had to focus on my work. When Singapore's market opened, California was trading at $8.49. I took a cautious approach, buying $5 million worth of shares. The market was flooded with sellers, likely driven by my old company dumping stock. The price kept falling, but I kept buying. Investors were panicking, hoping to salvage anything they could, driving the price down to $5.61. At that point, I made a final $15 million purchase, bringing our holdings to just over 10% of the company. I called George, and we shared a drink over the phone. By the time I logged off, the price had climbed to $8.72 as investors jumped in to take advantage of the lower prices. The short sellers were left stuck. After cleaning up, I climbed into bed, exhausted, and passed out from the melatonin pills I'd forgotten in the car. The next morning, I woke up late to find everyone downstairs. Jean was on the phone, and when she saw me, she quickly ended the call. "You must have been up late," she said, handing me a cup of coffee. I nodded, sipping. "We'll have to wait and see," I replied, trying to downplay the situation. She kissed my cheek and left to take the kids to school. I checked the stock price later that morning. It had rallied to $10.14, a good sign for those holding shares and a nightmare for the short sellers. It was time to stabilize the stock and focus on its potential, away from the games being played. After washing my face, I started catching up with our investment group. I visited the Miller Real Estate website. It was business as usual, with a mission to help troubled teens through their New Horizons House program. There were no further details, so I turned to Facebook. Anthony Miller's profile was filled with photos of his cars, vacations, and corporate events. One photo stood out, the MRE team, with Anthony in the center, Evelyn to his left, and Jean to his right. Two things stood out. First, Anthony Miller looked much older and had lost a lot of weight. He appeared haggard. Second, Jean was holding his hand and looking at him instead of the photographer. It wasn't necessarily significant, but it felt off. I browsed Jean's Facebook page, which was full of family photos, including a few from happier times. Everything else was mundane: work, school, sports. There was no real insight, just surface-level updates. The last photo of us together was over 2 years ago, and most recent posts were cryptic, reflecting on life and praying for positive outcomes. I called Clarence Williams again, who reassured me that investigations take time. Then I spoke with my father, who advised me to avoid jumping to conclusions and let the experts handle things. I was torn between trying to fix things with John or doing nothing and risking regret. I called a prominent local lawyer for advice. She suggested I try to repair the marriage rather than rush into a divorce. There are rarely winners, she said. Mostly there are only losers. Next, I reached out to Chad, one of Jean's former colleagues. We met for lunch and I asked him about MRE. He was reluctant at first, but soon told me that after Tony Miller's wife passed away, he became less driven, and his daughter Evelyn became his focus. Chad added that Tony and Jean had become close, even calling her his office wife. Before leaving, Chad mentioned a rumor. Anthony Miller had been diagnosed with cancer. I followed up with a call to St. John's Hospital, where I learned Tony was in the oncology ward. Later that evening, Jean confronted me about visiting the MRE website. I tried to remain calm. I was just trying to understand what's going on, I said. She pressed me, accusing me of spying. I looked for what I found, I replied, keeping my poker face. She then mentioned I'd also checked Evelyn's Instagram. I was caught off guard. Why are you acting like this? She asked, growing emotional. I took a drag from my cigarette and exhaled slowly, knowing she hated it. Who are you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jean struggled to answer, finally saying, I'm your wife, Adam Carter. That's who I am. But her tone lacked conviction. She looked at me, unsure of herself. I'm not sure, she added quietly. I stepped back as Jean gasped and ran inside. I finished my drink and went to work. CEA's stock was climbing, hitting $11.92 with strong momentum. I stayed online, tracking the market. While most stocks were flat, CEA was showing significant movement. A couple of hours later, George and I agreed this was a solid trend we could take advantage of. That night, I crashed on the fold-out couch with a blanket. The next morning, I was surprised to see CEA closed at $13. The trend was strong, and our investors had doubled their money. If it hit $25, we'd see over 300% profit. After getting the kids off to school, I went to the gym, then grabbed a late breakfast at IHOP, making some calls. Later, I met with George for 2 hours to discuss starting a joint brokerage, with offices in Springfield and Chicago. He'd handle the business structure while I worked on a market plan. By late afternoon, Jean came home alone and we sat down in the living room. She poured me a bourbon and herself some wine. I don't know what you think I've been doing while you've been away, she started, tense. I took a sip. I haven't thought about it. Well, you've been very disrespectful to me, she said. I raised an eyebrow. Is that how you feel? She nodded but paused. I'm sorry, Adam, she said. You're not home anymore. We're like strangers. After 17 years, we're strangers because I've been gone 4 months? I asked, incredulous. The texts, Skypes, and calls didn't matter? She wiped away a tear. There was pressure, but you're my husband, and I'm your wife. She stood up abruptly, leaving me sitting there, confused. I heard her cell phone ring, but couldn't make out the conversation. It wasn't long before she came downstairs in a gray dress and pearls. Go shower and get dressed. I'll make a reservation at the Chesapeake, she said. In 15 minutes, I was ready. We drove to the restaurant, and she started with a gin and tonic. I ordered a Singapore sling to beat her to it. At dinner, she ordered mussels, and I had oysters. We drank Chardonnay and talked about the kids. She seemed unconcerned about my job situation. You're one of the smartest people I know, Adam. I'm sure you'll find something soon, she said, smiling. Her optimism didn't match reality. I was a pariah at the company, and our future now hinged on my stubbornness regarding CA. As the evening went on, we talked about friends and family, the usual stuff. She asked about former co-workers, and I avoided mentioning MREs until I had more information. For the main course, I ordered the captain's platter, and she had lobster. She treated me to wine, and I wondered if she was trying to get me drunk. If she was, it worked. The evening passed easily, and she was affectionate, caressing my hand and looking into my eyes. If she was having an affair, she was doing a great job of hiding it. When we got home, I went to bed, and the next morning I woke up to the smell of breakfast. Jean had made scrambled eggs, bacon, and English muffins. We ate together, and she told me about things around the house that needed attention before heading out to pick up the kids. I went outside to start cleaning up the backyard when my phone rang. It was Clarence Williams. "Can you talk?" he asked, and my stomach sank. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop. I quickly got ready, left work unfinished, and headed out. He was already waiting when I arrived. He wasn't what I expected. Small, unassuming, and dressed like a nobody, he looked like a man who blended into the background. About 5'7" or 5'8", gray-haired, thin, and balding, his clothes were basic and worn, like he shopped at Walmart. Yet the high-end cell phone he pulled out didn't match his shabby appearance, and I couldn't help but smile inwardly. He'd clearly perfected the image of a lowlife. We shook hands, and his firm grip confirmed that there was more to him than met the eye. Without wasting time, he got straight to the point. "Let's not beat around the bush, Mr. Carter," he said. "We didn't catch your wife at the hotel, but we have evidence that she's been having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller, for at least 2 years. It's well known at the office." Clarence went on to explain that their daughter, Evelyn, knew about it and even helped cover it up. Jean had been leaving the kids with friends and spending weekends with Miller while I was away. The words hit me hard. My pulse raced as Clarence spoke, but I could barely hear him anymore. It was one thing to suspect an affair, but hearing it confirmed by a stranger was unbearable. He continued, almost as an afterthought. "Miller has aggressive pancreatic cancer. He's got only a few months to live." The news shocked me, confirming some things I'd suspected but didn't fully understand. It all made sense now. John's behavior, her emotional distance. She was mourning the man she loved. I opened up to Clarence about my suspicions, not because he was a friend, but because I needed to talk to someone. Clarence's next words confirmed my suspicions about the affair. "Cheaters don't just cheat. They're invested in each other. It's not just about sex. They go on dates, share experiences, talk about their lives. They develop a real relationship," he continued, explaining how cheaters justify their actions by blaming their spouse's perceived faults. I understood it all, but it hurt even more to think that Jean wasn't just cheating on me. She was emotionally invested in Miller. As we talked, we agreed to pause the investigation while I processed everything. Clarence left, and I sat there, stunned by the reality of my situation. My marriage was over. The idea of staying together for the kids felt pointless. Divorce was a fact of life for most families, and I knew it would be mine too. I tried to quiet the storm of emotions inside me, but it was difficult. I thought back to my time in the Far East, where business and life were viewed in multi-generational terms. But I wasn't a mob boss, and I didn't have any powerful allies. I was just a man, alone. As I sipped my coffee, I wondered how I could take revenge on a dying man. For Jean, it was simple. Take away something she loved. I didn't have a solid plan yet, but an idea was starting to form. First, I needed to deal with Miller. He disrespected me, my marriage, and my kids by pursuing Jean while knowing she was married. That couldn't go unanswered. My anger flared again. My work evaluations had noted 2 key traits: risk aversion and stubbornness. Now, both were pushing me to retaliate, regardless of the cost. A plan was taking shape. I called Clarence and asked him to find as many women as possible who had gone through Miller's program, hoping to uncover something that could work to my advantage. It wasn't a fully formed plan, but it was a start, and I was starting to catch big fish. In 2014, I was transferred to our Kenya branch for 3 weeks. During a weekend off, I went deep-sea fishing in the Indian Ocean. There, I learned a valuable lesson. You don't just fish for marlin. First, you use trolling lures to catch a smaller fish, then use that as live bait to catch a marlin. I succeeded, but felt sorrow seeing the marlin fight for its life. That would be my only big-game fishing attempt. But the experience gave me a plan. Back home, I tried to shake off my thoughts, doing breathing exercises until I felt like I could carry on like before. Jean wasn't home yet, so I went back to my unfinished tasks. When she returned with the kids, we had a nice family dinner. Steaks, corn, and coleslaw. I acted the part of the loving father and husband, while inside I was cynical and calculating. I suspected that, with her lover dead, Jean was trying to cover her tracks, using me as her backup. The time with the kids and with Jean was as fake as her attempts to salvage our marriage. Cynical Adam told me to remember that. After the divorce, I found myself living a double life, pretending to be someone I wasn't while watching myself play the role. It felt like watching an actor in a movie. On the bright side, George and I launched our new trading firm in Singapore, and CEA stock was climbing, more than doubling our investment. I became paranoid, setting up strict security on my devices and deleting everything unnecessary. I would upload data to the cloud, reformat my phone, and then call investors, preparing to buy out parts of their businesses. The non-compete clause didn't worry me. My layoff had made it irrelevant. My marriage front stayed quiet as I waited for new intel from Clarence. On Thursday, he handed me a flash drive with details on 14 women Miller had helped through his program. One worked as a courtesan, and I decided to contact her. I bought a new phone and arranged to meet her at a motel. She was small, tattooed, and introduced herself as Layla. After some haggling, I paid her for information on the shelter she'd stayed at after being kicked out by her stepfather. She told me she'd been taken in by Mrs. Miller after being found on the streets and had stayed there for months before leaving. Her story wasn't unique, but it gave me the information I needed. I asked her about her time at the shelter and whether she'd been bullied. After some negotiation, she agreed to help me, wanting $5,000 for her trouble. As we talked, I explained that Miller had destroyed my marriage and I wanted to destroy his. She raised her price to $20,000, then $25,000, promising to use the power of the Me Too movement to get back at Miller. We agreed on a plan. She would gather information, and I promised to help her start a new life afterward. I gave her my contact info, asking her to save it under a fake name. Phase 1 was complete, and I had the leverage I needed. At home, I kept playing my dual role, acting normal on the outside while my mind ran in circles. Jean seemed oblivious, too focused on the Miller Legacy project to notice. I continued to gather information on how far along the project was without raising any suspicion. We cooked and ate together like old times. Over breakfast, Jean mentioned she'd be busy helping with the opening of New Horizons House on Monday at 10. I already knew the details from the company's website and social media. I pretended to be interested and subtly probed. She mentioned the mayor and local media, including CBS, would be there. Did they stop the chemo so Tony could attend? I heard her ask. I didn't catch the answer. Jean got emotional, saying, "It's going to be life-changing." But I thought, not if I had anything to do with it. The divorce papers were ready, just waiting for my go-ahead. Illinois had no-fault divorce laws, and I couldn't sue Miller for loss of affection. It would simply be a case of irreconcilable differences. The day started well for me. Our stock had hit its issue price and was rising. After some coffee, I tuned into WMA radio. At 9:30, Evelyn was interviewed about MRE's social responsibility programs. She talked about New Horizons House as an evolution of her mother's work, which her father continued. It sounded like a feel-good story, and the host encouraged donations. But then a call came in that changed everything. A woman, Layla, claimed Miller had misused her. Evelyn freaked out, denying it, but Layla wasn't done. "Your father ruined me," she cried, revealing she worked as a courtesan because of Miller's actions. The station went into chaos, with listeners divided. Some dismissed Layla as a liar, while others supported her. The situation escalated when more women called in, each with their own harrowing stories. One woman even sobbed, admitting Miller had maltreated her when she was young. The calls kept coming, the story gaining traction fast. By lunchtime, social media was in a frenzy. Women across the country shared their own stories of misuse under the Me Too movement, turning the incident into a viral firestorm. I called Vicky, a journalist friend, to see if she'd heard about the WMA interview. She had, and after I mentioned my wife's involvement with MRE and New Horizons, she said she'd look into it. If true, it could be the biggest misuse case Springfield had seen in generations. By the time the dust settled, the damage was done. Social media was flooded with angry reactions, and the story spread worldwide. I felt a headache coming on as the weight of it all hit me. When the kids were at school, I collapsed into the shower, overwhelmed with guilt and grief. I cried harder than I had since my mother's end of life. The line I had crossed couldn't be undone. I had unleashed chaos, and now I had to face the consequences. Nietzsche's words echoed in my mind. He who fights with monsters must take care lest he become a monster himself. I picked up Dean and Kathy, then drove home to make chicken stir-fry with noodles and a small salad. We waited for Jean, but she didn't show up. I tried calling, but her phone was off. We ate, and I saved a plate of food for her in the microwave and a small salad in the fridge. Dean, Katie, and I played a board game while Jean was still missing. By 10 p.m., the kids went to bed, and I was alone when Jean finally walked in. She looked drained, like she had been through a storm. Her eyes were heavy, and her hair was disheveled. "You heard?" she sighed. "Have you heard what they're saying about Tony?" She groaned, collapsing into a chair. I handed her a drink. She downed half of it in one gulp. "Yeah, sounds like your boss is a carnivore," I said flatly. "Where there's smoke, there's fire." "No, Adam," she quickly protested. "He's a good man. He would never do anything like that." I pressed on. "Time for phase 2, Jean. She looked up, surprised. You obviously didn't know him very well. You don't know me, I shot back. We've been married a long time. You know what I'm capable of, and I know you. You may know Miller as your boss, but who knows what he's really like? No, she whispered, shaking her head. He's a good man. I'd know. I raised an eyebrow. How do you know? He's your boss. He could be hiding a lot of things. She sighed. I haven't interacted with him much, but I always felt like he was hiding something. He's the kind of guy you wouldn't leave alone with your wife or daughters. And, I asked. She froze, her face drained of color. No, never, she snapped, but her response was more defensive than certain. Because you're a beautiful woman, Jean, I said, and if what they're saying is true, he's probably not the man you think he is. She burst into tears, staring into her drink, as if hoping for answers that weren't there. She finished it, then headed upstairs, exhausted. Good night, she said quietly to the kids. After her shower, I pretended to be asleep when she came down in her robe. I heard her on the phone with someone, likely Evelyn. I caught fragments of her conversation. She kept saying nightmare and asking, why isn't there more than one woman saying she was attacked? Then she mentioned, I don't think this will go away easily. She made a second call. Hi, Tony, I heard her say, her tone more soothing. I caught snippets. It'll all be resolved. It's a misunderstanding. She moved to the kitchen and I heard her whisper, I love you too. The microwave beeped and she spent some time alone, likely snacking. By the time she went to bed, I was already asleep. Saturday morning, I made breakfast and took Dean and Kathy to sports practice. When I got home, I spoke with Vicky, who told me another woman had come forward, bringing the total to 4. MRE was distancing itself from the New Horizons project, and local civic groups were issuing denials. By mid-morning, the Attorney General's office had announced a full investigation. By the time I got home, the story had almost disappeared from the news. The stock market was closed, so there was nothing to do. I spoke with George about business and with my father about my marriage. He agreed it was beyond repair. I feel for Dean and Kathy, he said, but they'll adapt like all kids do. I called Jean. Where are you? I asked, concerned. Evelyn and the lawyers are trying to fight these lawsuits. She hesitated, but eventually the lawyerly advice couldn't help. Over the weekend, MRE's attendance dropped by over 80%. By Monday, the phones were ringing off the hook with canceled orders. The opening of New Horizons was postponed until the negative press died down. That Monday, a woman came forward with an unusual revelation. Married to a wealthy businessman, she shared that she had spent 8 days at the house before contacting her parents. During her stay, Miller had misused her twice. She left her lawyers details for all the other sufferers to contact, encouraging them to file a class action lawsuit. By the end of the week, 5 things had happened. First, Miller was interviewed at the hospital by the district attorney, but his condition worsened afterward. Second, 3 of the 5 women came forward and testified, all claiming to have been attacked around 5 years ago. Third, the media frenzy grew so intense that MRE shut its doors. Jean, still hopeful, told me every night how Evelyn was trying to keep the business afloat while vendors and customers left. Fourth, the stock price for CA had risen past $24, and I was selling shares in blocks. Each snapped up quickly without affecting the price. We recouped our initial investment and still held 2/3 of the stock. Fifth, I was ready to celebrate. My dad had taken Dean and Kathy for the weekend, and I'd bought a chilled bottle of 2012 Veuve Clicquot. But when I pulled into the driveway, I saw an MRE-branded BMW parked next to Jean's Lexus. I entered the house to find Jean crying, with Evelyn consoling her. Ladies, I greeted them, walking over to the crystal cabinet. I uncorked the champagne with a flourish and filled 3 glasses. They stared at me, stunned, as I raised a glass. Salute, I said, drinking half of mine with a burp. Then the shouting began. John, you're divorcing me? I asked, coldly. I thought we were a family. I spotted divorce papers on the coffee table. Evelyn, how could you? I continued, turning to her. Adam, don't you care about your wife? She asked, but I just handed Jean a drink. We're celebrating the end of an era, I said. I finished my glass and reached for the bottle. Hello, Evelyn, I smirked. First, I could, and I did. Confused, she blinked. Second, I stopped caring about her when she became your father's hoe. I knocked over my glass in a mock toast. Here's to your father's legacy, Evelyn. I hope he lives long enough to stand trial so the world knows what a piece of crap he really is. Evelyn turned white and collapsed. Turning to Jean, I said, "Get a lawyer. The kids will stay with my father until custody is settled." Jean stared at me, terrified. It was clear I had become the monster I feared. Evelyn dropped her glass, and both women looked at me as if I were mad. "You left me alone so often. I needed human contact," I mocked. Jean tried to justify herself, but couldn't meet my gaze. "I understand," I said humorlessly. "And how's that working for you now?" Then Evelyn snapped. "How many women did you sleep with while you were gone?" she yelled. "All men want angels, but you all act like the piece of crap who fathered me." "Just because your father ruined women in marriages doesn't mean the rest of us stoop to his level," I shot back. I leaned toward Evelyn. "Your father is an offender and a criminal. He'll probably die before going to prison. His legacy project will never happen, and MRE will file for bankruptcy. His money will be frozen by the courts. You'll have to move and change your name." She trembled, crying. "I think you helped lure these girls, just like Ghislaine Maxwell did with Epstein," I added. She was speechless, horrified. "I need to contact the media about you," I said calmly. "No, please," she begged. "It's all a lie. My father's a good man." I turned to Jean. "You have 2 hours to pack and leave," I said coldly. "If you're still here when I return, I'll call the press." "Screw you," she spat. "I'll hire a lawyer first thing. We'll see who gets what." Jean whispered, "Oh, God," as her face crumpled. 2 hours, I repeated, and left. I drove a few blocks before the adrenaline caught up with me, and I started shaking uncontrollably for about 15 minutes. Once I calmed down, I called my father. I told him Jean had handed over the papers and asked him to keep Dean and Kathy with him. "Allow Jean to visit, but don't leave her alone with them," I warned. After the call, I drove aimlessly, stopping for gas before heading home. It was 10 p.m. when I arrived, and the house felt like a tomb, echoing with the ghosts of happier times. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't sleep. 2,500 years ago, Socrates said life without exploration isn't worth living. Lying in bed, trying to avoid examining my own thoughts, I couldn't escape the feeling that things were spiraling beyond control, and there was no turning back. I feared the chaos on social media might spill into the courtroom, and I worried I'd be implicated. I decided I needed to get Layla out of town to sever any connection to the issue. With that settled, I fell into a restless half-sleep. The next morning, I woke up just as tired. After my usual routine, I went downtown for breakfast and called the kids. Dean had sensed trouble at home, but I promised I'd talk to him and Katie soon. Over coffee, I reached Layla. "Did I do as promised?" I asked. "You did," she replied. We confirmed she was flying to Chicago the next day. I'd already transferred money to one of George's accounts, and then to Layla's. She was now $25,000 richer, heading to a new job in property management, thanks to one of George's contacts. While drinking my second cup, Vicky called. 3 women have sued Miller for damages. Papers will be served Monday, she said. We discussed the story's timing, noting how the publicity from Layla's claims had triggered others, much like the Weinstein case. I spent Saturday with Dean and Kathy, telling them about the divorce and their mom's affair with her boss, Anthony Miller. Kathy didn't understand, but Dean did. Afterward, we went to the golf course and had dinner at a Greek restaurant before heading to bed. That night, I returned to my empty house, filled with the silence of broken times. On Sunday, Jean's parents called, asking if reconciliation was possible for the children's sake. I explained that reconciling with Jean, given her affair with Miller, was impossible. "It'll all be settled in court," I assured them, ending the call and leaving them to process the reality of their daughter's actions. Life moved slowly and painfully. Dean and Kathy were back at my place, and my father helped out. Meanwhile, my business with George gained momentum. By the end of the second week, the media storm around Miller had quieted. Vicky told me a 4th woman had joined the lawsuit, but not Layla, which I found odd. I had a meeting with lawyers to divide property. I'd set up education accounts for Dean and Kathy, ensuring they were protected. Jean's lawyers were still digging into my past employer, suspecting a golden handshake. It was only a matter of time before they subpoenaed HR documents. I offered Jean nothing, as she had a job and was financially stable. She demanded $250,000 in cash and assets, but I countered that it was all lost in bad investments. I warned her lawyer that if she didn't take the deal, I'd drag the case out until they ran out of money. Jean insisted she deserved half, but I shot back. "Go ask Miller for money. You've had a better marriage with him than you ever did with me." The divorce dragged on for months. Jean vacillated between blaming me minimizing her affair and wanting to reconcile. One meeting, she threatened to move back into the house with her lawyer, but I warned her, "Try it, and I'll expose everything." As I left the lawyer's office one day, I saw Evelyn sitting in the foyer, glaring at me. I smiled at her, knowing the tables had turned. "You should have stayed out of this," I said. "What you sow is what you reap." 2 days later, Layla had another $5,000, and the local media was buzzing with the news that Evelyn Miller had helped her father, Anthony Miller, who was already disgraced. The district attorney faced growing criticism for not arresting Miller or taking action against his daughter. At a media briefing, the DA's office claimed they were still in the early stages of the investigation, but the press didn't hold back, fueling another storm. The public, still reeling from the Weinstein and Epstein cases, quickly turned its attention to Evelyn. Miller was sued by 4 women, and I began to worry. The case could derail everything I had planned. It was now 6 weeks since I returned from Singapore, and I was working from home when the doorbell rang. It was Evelyn. "What do you want?" I asked, annoyed. "Can we talk, Adam?" she pleaded. "No, I don't want to be associated with someone like you," I said, slamming the door in her face. She called again just as I expected. I opened the door and she begged, "Please, Adam, just talk." I almost laughed. "Where's your entitlement, Evelyn?" I muttered, then added aloud, "I don't think so. You just want to record me and twist my words." "I won't," she promised. "Good," I said, "but leave your phone in the car and wait here." I shut the door, set my phone down, and hit record. "Okay, talk," I said, sitting on the couch. She hesitated before sitting down on the edge, as though ready to run. She brushed her hair out of her face and started. "I know it's you, Adam. You're the one who created this nightmare." I stared at her blankly. She probably saw me as a snake in her garden. "Stop it, Adam," she said, her voice shaking. I didn't respond. She tried again, shifting tactics. "I know you were hurt by Jean's affair with my father," she started. "Whoever was hurt," I cut her off. "But this lie about my father abusing women needs to stop. It has to be disproven." I couldn't help but laugh at her. "There's nothing I can do, Evelyn. It's up to the court now." "Please, Adam," she begged, "make it stop. I know you can." I smiled coldly. "Now that everything's falling apart for you, you want me to help? Where were you when your father was entertaining my wife?" Her face turned red with shame. "Oh yes, you were helping, making sure she was your father's hoe," I said. We stared at each other in silence for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, "When will you stop, Adam? When will you be satisfied?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she fought to maintain composure. This was no act, I thought. She was broken. "Not until your family is completely destroyed, Evelyn," I said, my voice low. Her eyes widened in horror. She finally understood. "There will be no stopping," I added, making sure she got the message. "No ceasefire, no peace." She stood, silently processing my words, then asked, "How? How do you want revenge, Adam?" She was in her early 30s, unmarried, with no kids. Her Facebook showed a recent breakup. Stumbling, she reached the door, then hurried to her BMW and drove off, swerving down the street. I felt mixed emotions, satisfaction from the pain I caused her, but also disgust at my own cruelty. It was still early, but I needed a drink. The rest of the week was spent in law offices, handling clients and finalizing due diligence on 2 promising stock listings, one in Hong Kong and the other in Johannesburg. Meanwhile, the class action lawsuit against Miller moved forward. The Millers scrambled to settle out of court, but the DA was unsure how to prosecute a dying man, so we all waited. I heard that the Millers had lost almost everything. MRE's real estate was sold off, and the women received over $2 million each. It was effectively the end of MRE. I still needed one last step to complete my revenge, so I went to the hospital to see Miller. I walked into his room without challenge. I was there to ensure he knew who had destroyed him, his legacy, his life. He lived for 2 more days before passing away. Evelyn had him cremated, and only 5 people attended the small ceremony. One of them was Jean. She wanted to take Dean and Kathy with her. I looked her in the eye. "I'll see you dead first." "You would, wouldn't you?" She spat back, her face a mix of fear and hatred, just like Evelyn's the last time we met. "I didn't realize you were so vindictive," she said. "You ruined him. It was you, wasn't it?" "And for what? Because he and I had a relationship?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. I laughed bitterly. "You're the one who planted the seeds, Jean. Why didn't you just tell me you wanted someone else? We could have divorced, and that would have been the end of it." She paused, then quietly admitted, I loved Tony. He gave me what I needed. When he was with me 100%. With you, I always felt like your job came first. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. When we had Dean and Katie, I wasn't even second place. It was always your job, the kids, and I got whatever was left. I needed someone to put me first. I could have walked away, but instead, I pulled out my phone. Listen to this, I said, playing a recording of Miller's voice. Was it worth it? I asked. No, Miller wheezed. You ruined everything I spent my life building. I laughed harshly. It's your fault, Miller. I ruined you. How did you find out about me using them? He gasped. I laughed again, then stopped. I thought I was imagining it, but now I get why those women went after you. It only took one crack, and everything shattered. Screw you, Carter, he wheezed. He tried to sit up, showing the last of his defiance. Jean collapsed catatonic. I walked away. She was no longer my concern. When MRE started selling assets, I bought the house they were turning into New Horizons House for cheap. It wasn't easy to get everything together, but it fell into place like it was meant to be. Once the deal was done, I went public, announcing that I'd bought the house and was turning it into a shelter for misused women, run entirely by women. I renamed it Joy Carter House in honor of my mother. My dad cried and kissed me. Dean and Kathy were impressed. The house was put in trust, with me, Dad, and the 4 women who sued Miller as trustees, all contributing to make it happen. The local media hailed it as Project Phoenix, showering praise on us, though I stayed out of the spotlight. It helped me look good in court during my divorce. Jean got primary custody of the kids, and I paid alimony until they turned 18. She'd stay in the house, but pay half the mortgage. Alimony was off the table for her. During asset division, Jean accused me of hiding money. I told her to drop it or I'd ruin her life. She backed off, wary of upsetting me. That's what fear looked like. I told her she'd get a cut when the house sold, and we were done. The divorce took a while, but eventually I got a 3-bedroom condo for the kids. I had them almost every weekend. Jean went back to selling houses, so weekends worked out well for me. I missed the kids when I traveled, especially to the Far East, but overall, life was decent. I laughed at myself. Things were bad, but not that bad. Jean's relationship with Evelyn ended after I showed her the recording of Miller. I also circulated an edited tape of his confession. Evelyn left a couple months later, and I never heard from her again. I met Layla, whose real name was Leanne Roxton, in Chicago. She had turned her life around. Did you know? I asked her, curious about the unspoken truth. She admitted that no one directly acknowledged the misuse, out of fear. I offered $5,000 to a few women I knew to say they were misused, but Layla was skeptical. The second woman I reached out to was Rita French, who broke down on the phone. After the radio broadcast of Miller's daughter, Rita finally came forward. You could have made so much money, I said, sympathizing. She shook her head. By the time they sued Miller, I was in Chicago. I didn't know what was going on. When I looked again, it was over. But you gave me a good start, Adam. Thank you. That was it. My revenge was complete, and it had gone better than I expected. I kept telling myself I wasn't a monster, but was I? The Millers were finished, like something out of fiction. I'd learned the art of revenge and executed it in ways I never imagined. Business was thriving, and George was talking about retiring, maybe selling me his share. Dean and Kathy adjusted as teenagers do. School, friends, sports. Mom and Dad became background players, useful for cash and rides. Life went on. 4 years after the divorce, Jean married an older man. Dean and Kathy liked him. I remained single, still struggling with trust. Encouraged by my father, I started seeing a counselor to work through my issues. But it was clear I still had a long way to go.